It's just so wonderful being here in Yerevan on my third visit. My first visit was in 1980 as a 16-year-old American kid, and I can tell you from my outsider perspective then, it's a very different place, and it's very exciting to be part of this. My great-grandmother used to tell me when I was a child, Vorkan lezukides, ankam martes, which for those of you who don't speak Armenian like myself too well, it means for as many languages as you speak, you're that many people. The message there is, with greater understanding and with language, we can understand culture and therefore become broader people with a broader perspective. What I'm talking about today, though, is the opposite of that. It's about the value of not having a broad perspective, of not having that sort of feeling that you understand things or feeling that things are blasé. It's about seeing things for the first time and the visceral reaction we have when we see things that are that sort of different for us and that foreign for us and our culture. I want to talk about how that impacted me as a designer and what I saw and what I experienced on my first trip to India in 1989. I went to visit some friends of mine who lived in New Delhi, and while I was there, I would spend my days sort of ambling around the old city, Old Delhi, which was about as different a place as I ever could imagine a place being. My friends from Delhi generally didn't go to the old city because they felt it was crowded, there was no way to get there except on foot or by rickshaw, and it was just generally off limits for them. For me, it was just this magical place which seemed like a place out of the past, like 100 years ago or hundreds and hundreds of years ago. There was something ancient about it that really fascinated me. As you can see, the streets are so crowded and it's really very chaotic, but it was that difference that for me was hugely exciting. It was a romantic city for me, the call to prayers echoing throughout the small lanes. I would walk up and down the narrow lanes and discover all these small shops. Every small shop had things which were handmade and were generally made in workshops either right behind the stores or right next to them. For me, discovering a place where things were made was very electrifying. All I had known from my experience in America was things which felt very prepackaged or manufactured. So to see things which actually had that handmade element was absolutely mesmerizing for me. I saw shops which did printed textiles, hand-bound books, all kinds of things that I really couldn't imagine. The shops that impacted me the most, though, were the shops that were making objects made in metal, hand-forged buckets and shovels and scissors, things which took such skill to create. As a fine art student in New York, having worked in metal, I knew what it was like to work that material, and it was something that was just really awe-inspiring for me. I would hunt out craftsmen in the old city by listening for the beating of the metal, I'd follow rickshaws which had interesting things on the back of them, all as ways to find workshops where things were being made. I discovered a small workshop where they were doing sand cast bronze and learned to smell the baked molasses in the sand casting process, and would hunt out other small workshops which were doing sand casting to basically learn how the crafts happened, to understand what was available in terms of crafts. My impressions were that the pieces had a vibration, they had a vitality to them that I didn't recognize from products I had seen abroad, which all felt very manufactured looking. The pieces themselves were highly imperfect, I would say, and they weren't very desirable for the local community. People who were making hand-forged buckets, for example, had made them that way for hundreds of years, but the local consumers were running to the stores and buying the imported plastic buckets, which held water, didn't leak, were much lighter and easier to clean. Shops which were making scissors by hand, beautifully, from my perspective, incredibly beautifully forged handmade scissors, were withering because people were buying the imported scissors made in China with the orange plastic handles that cut paper really well. So there was this whole tribe of artisans who were doing work which was absolutely exquisite from my point of view, but was becoming obsolete in the local market. From my perspective, as an artist in New York, the only people who were making things were other artists. So the work that they were doing for me was just utterly inspiring and really just took my breath away. At that point, there were no phone books, no directories, no trade shows, nothing to support the artisans. So the only way to find them was really to sort of hunt them out and listen for them and sort of explore the old cities. And really, these are the kinds of workshops that I would just fall upon. What I would do is just watch the craftsmen, stand in the shops. There I was, sort of the ultimate American at that point, with baseball cap and t-shirt, staring and watching these guys doing their incredible work. I think they thought I was absolutely crazy sometimes and wondered what I was doing. But over time, I did drawings in a notebook that I had and would show the artisans drawings of things that I had made and ask them in sort of gesticulation and with drawings in my notebook what I wanted them to create. Some of the craftsmen, like this guy here, was making cooking vessels. The cooking vessels in India were something that had been made for centuries, but now with modernization and industrialization, most Indian kitchens were sort of looking to become more westernized and modern, and we're looking for pots and pans with plastic handles, which would be easier to hold and more convenient. The craftsmen, which I considered national treasures and people who just had extraordinary skills, were just becoming obsolete. Generally, India on its quest towards industrialization was looking for things which felt more modern and felt more Western. So, I decided at that point I would work with the local craftsmen and try to make objects which celebrated what they did. What I looked at was the beauty of the imperfection. Unlike the cookies we ate earlier and the talk about design perfection, my philosophy was that we had to celebrate the handmade process and look at the inherent quality in the handmade goods. It was something very different for India and also something very different for the US market at that point. What I did was make pieces which showed all the hammer marks, all the hand-cut edges of the metal, and really say, let's celebrate the humanity in these pieces and say, yes, we're not machine-made. That's precisely why it has value. And it was my outsider perspective that saw the value in that, where these Indian artisans generally had very little pride in their work. In fact, they were embarrassed about it. My Indian friends were also quite embarrassed about what was available locally at that time. It was all about getting imported goods and how wonderful everything was abroad, and people felt very apologetic and really had no sense of pride in what was available locally. I made some buckets with those guys who were making the pots earlier, and instead of making them in copper and brass, I encouraged them to make them in stainless steel, which was a material they had never worked with. So we made the steel pots, and they were laughing to themselves afterwards, and finally I understood why. They said the pots looked like the pots that they put the cow dung in. So there was a lot of back and forth and confusion and giggles about the process, but over time, we really learned a lot from each other, and I decided to set up a workshop. There I am, there in my studio, and it was a very exciting time when I set up the workshop because we had a lot of magazines, international magazines come and see what we were doing. We had film crews from Europe coming to photograph it. We had a lot of encouragement from wealthy Indian clientele who would come to the studio and buy my work. But I think the ultimate for the workers when we had Bollywood stars come to the workshop and buy my things, because finally they realized that these things had value and they weren't just sort of my wrought-in iron pieces, as a lot of my Indian friends called them. Interestingly enough, over the years, this is some of my work now, I've had the opportunity to exhibit them all over the world. I was voted Indian Designer of the Year by Elle Decor magazine in India, which I took as a great compliment as a non-Indian. I was also invited by the government of India to represent the best of Indian handicrafts at trade shows in Australia and Japan. When the organizers found out I wasn't Indian, they were a bit shocked, but that was a lot of fun. And recently at a trade show in New York, I was exhibiting my pieces, and an Indian manufacturer came up to me and said, "Are these made in Italy?" And I kept saying, "No, India." And he kept saying, "Italy? Italy?" And I'd say, "No, India, India." And it wasn't until I told him in Hindi that he finally understood that these were pieces made in his own country that could be made with his own workers in his own factory. It took an outsider's vision to prove to an Indian what could be done in his own country. Thank you very much.